Showbiz.
Hello, welcome back to episode 4 with Lawrence August on kids' health. So happy you're back. Thank you, Lawrence, for coming to play again.
Yes. Number 4. We're cranking them out.
I'm so excited, and I know you saw, and for the viewers to know, they are up now on Rumble. All the episodes, we will continue to upload on there, and I will be adding them on BitChute as well. You can also check out my YouTube and, of course, Facebook and all that fun stuff. We're still on there.
Rumble.
Today's topic, I think, is incredibly important because it has to do with accountability too, I think, but also multiple layers. But we're going to talk about leading by example. So I'm not sure everything that's on deck. So why don't you take it away? Let me know your thoughts on this.
Leading by example. Thank you, Heidi. First of all, it's awesome to be back. I love doing these with you. This is so much fun. I thought it would just be nice to talk today about this idea of leading by example. This is a phrase that comes up a lot, and I think it comes up so often, and people have kind of a quick idea of what that means. But I think that there's a lot more going on to this concept of leading by example, and I thought it would just be really great to, take an episode and explore, and probably could explore it in 100 future episodes, because I think it really is important.
Agreed. Yeah. And you're not just talking about just the parent doing the right thing and follow me.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. So when you ask the average person on the street, when you think of leading by example to have your kid get healthy, right? What sort of comes to mind? And often you'll get the answer along the lines of, well, I need to eat healthy and exercise, right? We all understand that kind of basic concept of being a role model for our child. But what I have found is that it doesn't just stop there. That is part of it. I think that obviously we do know that children model behaviors, but I think that there's so much more to this idea of setting an example and what that actually means. And so if we're looking at parents that I've worked with, I've gleaned a lot of insight from, doing consultations. And essentially, I mean, I kind of look at each client as that they're in their own situation. So they're sort of one-offs. But if you were to bucket them into groups, you typically have 2 types of parents that come to see me. Type 1 would be where it's like, Lawrence, I need some help with my health. I'm kind of struggling with different issues in my family. We're all, there's a kind of like in this together sort of vibe to it. And that's kind of fun because you can start on an even playing field in some ways and kind of work on getting the whole family collectively together in the same mission. And the second category I find to be a lot more interesting. And I think that it's sort of like when I work with these types, I know that I'm really kind of strengthening my consultation muscles. And these types of families, whether it's a single parent or both parents that come to me, it's usually along the lines of, well, I'm doing everything right, but why isn't my kid, or why aren't my kids following that, right? So there's this kind of idea like, I eat perfectly, I'm exercising, I'm doing all these things. And, you look at these people, they're in amazing shape, and they can't for the life of them figure out why their child isn't like them. Right? Does that, and I think we all know these situations. I think as I'm saying this, probably people are sort of thinking of people they know in their life, like, or it might even be you listening to this episode. And so I think in that scenario, that's where this idea of leading by example can get really interesting.
Okay.
Now, when I first take on, a client that's coming to me for their child, what I like to do is, and I've mentioned this before, I like to speak to their situation first before we even have the child involved. Because what I want to do is I want to get a sense of where they're at, what their upbringing was like, what examples were shown to them, what parenting style was, inflicted upon them.
Mhm.
And that can really inform me on the direction to take, the consultation and what I'm going to need to sort of break out of the toolbox in order to help them actually kind of influence what's happening with their child. A lot of times you'll see people will they're carrying on the tradition,
Seen that. Yeah.
right? They're
Mhm.
continuing a cycle, and that can be tricky to sort of alert them to that because it's that always done it this way. Why should I have to change? And then there are times where, this person does have a sense that I don't want to, put that on. Like,
Like
sometimes
the
that can be a
opposite.
quick 10-minute discussion and the light bulbs go off.
Uh-huh.
But to give a quick illustration of why this goes deeper than just eating healthy and exercising, I think a lot of it has to do with connection. And typically what you see is when you get into conversations with these types of parents, they're eating well, they're exercising, but they're kind of checked out of their child's life.
I've seen that too. Yeah.
They
Mhm.
and they may or may not realize it. And I think that everybody wants what's best for their child, and I don't and quite often it's not there's no malicious intent ever, right? Because obviously they care enough to want to reach out to me for help, right? So it isn't a situation where they're lacking compassion or anything like this. They just might not be aware, right?
Mhm.
So we can look at all of these areas. So we start to explore these areas of life where, okay, let's make a list of the qualities that you would love for your child to have, and maybe areas that you feel that they're lacking. And a parent might come back and say, well, they're all over the place. They don't have any attention span, right? I'd love them to be more mindful, or maybe they're home all day playing video games, and I'd like to get them outdoors more. Or they're playing video games on the phone, or uh, they seem very high stressed, or they're not very resilient, right? So all of these qualities, I get parents to list those qualities out, and then we check in with the parent and say, let's talk about how you're exhibiting each one of these qualities. And that kind of starts the process. And a little blip, you
Okay.
guys, but
We're back.
we're going to pick it up right where,
Yes.
I guess, apparently where we left off. But
Okay.
um, what I was touching on was the process of a parent making that list of desirable qualities in their child, what they're actually looking like, what type of child would you love to raise? And then quite often they haven't asked the question is, well, what type of person are you? And are these qualities and these behaviors in alignment with yourself? And that kind of begins that journey. And it is fascinating how often that people will think that they demonstrate those qualities. But when you're actually kind of digging under the hood,
Mhm.
there's a lot of work to do. And I think that that's just the most responsible way of going about it, in this idea of, okay, you're looking to help your child. You love your child, obviously. You want what's best for your child, but we have to play the long game and do this right. And it's going to be a process of, often, like, as I said, it's reconnecting.
Mhm.
It's plugging in. That's almost
Yeah.
always what it is, to be quite honest.
Just
And
to
as
then reconnect again, the child-parent relationship.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, and again, there's an idea that, well, no, I'm around, or I'm totally attentive. But when you really investigate closer, that just simply isn't the case.
So there's some reflection and accountability. They
Yeah,
really have to look at themselves before they can be curious about what's happening with their child.
yeah. And
Mhm.
when so that's sort of step one with the whole process.
Okay.
Then we have to go into, okay, now that we've established sort of like these qualities and you want to exemplify those, the next bit of challenge in that is consistency. And when what you say matches what you do, that is a huge one. When what you say is actually matching what you do,
That's really huge.
it is unbelievably huge. And one of the
Mhm.
easiest examples, I think I've even mentioned it on one of our other episodes, is where, this idea like, violence is wrong and hitting is wrong. That's what you're telling the child. But, you're spanking their brother,
That's
or you're
hitting.
spanking them.
Yeah.
Don't hit. Hitting is wrong. We don't solve problems with hitting,
Yeah.
right? This consistency piece is so crucial because especially in little ones, right?
Mhm.
Children are dying for consistency.
Mhm.
And really, when we think of discipline, discipline is another word that is often misunderstood. This idea of discipline is sometimes looked at as it has a connotation like it's harsh. You're going to be
Right.
hard.
Right. When it's really boundaries. Like,
Absolutely. It is
mhm.
it is absolutely a beautiful thing. Discipline is something that children inherently crave
Mhm. They
because
do.
it's safe, it's
Yes.
structured,
Mhm.
there's meaningful coherence. And in fact, it's that kind of lack of coherence that makes them feel unsettled because they are actually trying to figure out what to do, right?
Mhm.
Well,
Mhm.
mom said this, but dad said that. Or dad said this, but dad did that. And that what dad said and what dad did didn't match, right? So there's
Mhm.
all of these things that we need to check in on to demonstrate consistency. And when you have consistency and you're showing up and you're committed to a process, that's what I mean by long game. Because it is you cannot just reestablish connection in 3 days. It's going
It's
to take
trust. It's a
some
deep
time.
trust. Yeah. Yeah.
And it is trust. So you want your child to be trustworthy. You would love your child to be vulnerable and open to you, right? We
Mhm.
hear about children hiding food.
I know.
I don't understand. I
Oh.
went into their room and I was cleaning their room. They were at school, and I went ahead and I cleaned the room and found candy wrappers and all these things. So what is happening there that child cannot open up?
They have to
And
hide.
how have they not gotten that level of trust and permission from you? What's happening there?
Oof.
And it really is this sort of golden rule sort of thing that, if we want respect from our child, we actually have to show what respect looks like.
Mm. Yeah.
You're not going to squeeze it out of them, demand it from them, shake it out of them. It's my way or the highway.
Ultimatums and
Because you might
yeah.
get, and depending on the child's personality type or whatever, they might be docile. They might not want to push back. You might feel like, well, they're just doing what I said, but they're internally building up resentment.
Mm.
That can often happen.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you're a bigger person, you could be a louder person, you could be a stronger person. It can be very intimidating.
Mm. And it's a child. It's a very difficult, hard subject because people have to take a good, hard look at themselves. They could be one way with other adults, but they're to their own children, they could be a completely different personality, and how that's perceived may not be what they think it is. So
Right?
it's really assessing your true relationship with your child.
Your true relationship, exactly. Well
Mhm.
said. And then it gets into, okay, what behaviors are we showing and how are we speaking about ourselves, right? So we want our children to have high self-esteem and self-love, but are we actually not honoring that in ourselves? It's another issue.
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
know, where if a parent has a strange, relationship with food and the way that they speak about food at the dinner table,
Mhm.
or even just, and I always say, like, that's like the worst time to speak about food, right?
Yeah,
So,
you
the
said that
worst
before.
time is like, we just
Yeah,
should be enjoying each other's company, and mealtime should be a place of connection.
yeah.
It's it's
You
it's
know,
it's not
I
a
remember.
food event. It's a family
Oh,
event.
yeah. Yeah, and I remember having to be a part of that table of the Clean Plate Club. Meanwhile, there's my mom eating like a slice of tomato with Paul Newman's dressing. That's it. I'm like, well, where's all your food? She was going through some of her own personal issues with that. It was very confusing. Very
Yeah.
confusing.
It's
Mhm.
so, oh, I'll go. I'm gonna go on a diet in January. I can't believe I'm eating this food. It's the holidays.
Yeah, I see that
It's
all
so,
the time
like,
still.
oh, I can't
Yeah.
believe this, and children are picking up on that. Like,
Yeah.
there's something like, oh, is there something wrong about this? Instead of saying something along the lines of, don't you just love holiday food? This is fun. Isn't holiday food
Mhm.
fun? Like,
Mhm.
it could be a time of celebration. And there's no guilt or shame attached to that. We have to be very careful of these things. Again, these are so common.
Oh, and it can slip right in there and you don't even know you're doing it. It's old programming and things, but it can slip in there. And they're so attentive to find out what's the right thing to do and what's mom do. And oh, your parents are oh, my parents. And they're watching every little bit. So you got to check yourself.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then we could get into even just going into communication and connection. It's very age dependent as well. Sometimes we just don't have the skill set or the tools to know, like in the developmental stage, the proper way to check in with feelings. An example of that would be, if you've got a 7 or an 8-year-old, and you want to know how they're feeling, asking them how they feel, it's going to be a tough ride at that
Yes.
age. Now, again, there's different levels of, maturation and development, but as a general rule, a very young child, tell me what's going on, what's wrong, or they freeze up. And in that situation, where this becomes the challenge to the parent, and the opportunity to the parent, really, is to observe to your best ability what you feel might be going on and give voice to that for the child.
That's it.
You're
Yeah.
upset because that person said that about you. You're stating that, and then you can kind of feel if you've got that right, and they will nod, and they're able to say yes. You need to be the one to kind of carry the weight and articulate to the best that you can tell what
Mhm.
they might be going through.
Mhm.
Whereas an older child, you can open up those conversations a little more and check in, and how
Yeah.
how did that feel when he said that to you?
Oh,
Like,
this is so beautiful,
you
Lawrence.
don't
Yeah.
have to, you were upset when he called you that name. That's a young child.
Mhm.
A little bit older, were you upset when he called you that?
Give them a chance to answer.
Give
Yeah.
him that chance. And then we get into this idea of active listening or reflective listening.
And there's the connection. Mm.
There's the connection. See, I'm
Yeah.
demonstrating it, right?
Yeah.
So, restate back when you get that vital bit of information from the child, restate that back to them to affirm that, and make sure that if I understand you correctly, do you mean, and you can repackage what they just said in a slightly different way, even. Now all of a sudden, wow, mom gets me. Dad's listening, really listening, not just waiting to respond, but really internalizing it, processing it. And it's going to be good for you too to do that, because that process of you speaking what you've just heard from your child, and then getting that confirmation that you've landed on the right, you're there. That's where we need to be.
Oh, I love that. I love the whole, I see you're feeling this way. I'm hearing you say this. Oftentimes, I have heard parents, and I've done it myself, where I'll ask a question and you're going to get a yes or no. And you don't want that. You wanted a juicy detail. Well, then stop asking, break it into a conversation. Tell me what this experience was like, for the older
And
kids.
sometimes
I
it's like,
love that you're pointing that out because it's something I didn't think would resonate with the whole topic, but that's the connection.
this is that, because of what you're
Yeah.
actually also doing is you're setting the example of how to communicate,
Mhm. Mm.
right? So you're always your language style, your vocabulary, that is an example. So, and how there is no one thing that is separate from the other when we're talking about trying to get a healthy human being out there in the world. None of these pieces just operate independently of the other. It all ties in. This isn't, here are the foods to eat, here's the exercises to do, go.
Yeah.
Without incorporating and integrating personality style, communication style, family dynamics, these are all really, really important things to consider up front, because it's that work that you do up front that
Mhm.
sets the tone for messaging things like food and exercise.
Mhm.
And then, then now that you have a connection, we know if we feel connected to someone, if we feel trust from somebody, we are influenced. We're in the age of the influencer.
Yeah.
People have followers, and, for whatever reason, those followers are connecting with something, and they're open to the ideas that influencer is going to deliver. So we need to inhabit the world of the child, and through communication, through reflective/active listening, we can start to kind of form that rapport.
Mm.
And so this is where I think leading by example is just so much more,
It
than
is. Yeah. Yeah.
eating
Yeah.
right
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
exercising.
No, that's it. Yeah. That is not just modeling behavior. It's connection.
Yeah, it is connection. And I mean, when you and when you do have to look at the practical things like, okay, screen time, right? Are you managing your screen time? Now that gets tricky, right? But yes, it does have to start with, well, because if they say like, "Mom, you're on your phone all day,"
I've
right?
gotten that. I've
And
gotten that
then
a lot.
it's like, "Why are you on your phone?" It's like, I, well, we grew up in that era with that. Remember that commercial? I learned it from watching you.
Yes.
It's like that
Yeah,
Shark
that's
commercial,
that. Yeah.
but it's like really what that is. And
Mhm.
there are different ways to go about handling screen time. And I think that there's a place for nuance. As much as we talk about discipline and boundaries, within that, though, we also have to understand that there's nuance, right? And this goes into the idea, and I think it's a really important concept to encourage and repeat as often as you can around your child, is the idea of trade-offs.
Mm.
When you can make that a part of life, the understanding of trade-offs, because every single thing you will find has to do with some sort of trade-off.
Like a
And
reward, you mean? Or
no, well, reward could play into that. But
uh-huh.
what I mean by trade-offs is simply the idea that when you're doing this thing, you can't do this other thing.
Ah,
Or when you're
gotcha.
doing this thing, these consequences come from that.
I
And
see
that
that.
can be things like punishment and reward, but also just be the simple idea of this idea that when your time is being occupied with a certain activity, that's less time for these certain other things. And that's an extremely deep, valuable lesson. I think, like, I remember reading years ago, it was an author, and he said, I'm writing my book, and you tend to think like, well, your audience is people that, you know, you're trying to get them to read your book over another book. That's
Mhm.
what you think the trade-off is for that person. Like, I want you to read my book and not that book. But what really the trade-off is I'm competing. If I'm an author, I'm competing against people that listen to podcasts. I'm competing against people, movies. Every activity the person does, I'm actually competing.
Mm.
The category of reading, in other words, is competing against all these other things that people like to do.
Mhm.
So that is a powerful thing when you really realize how deep that gets, is that we all have the same amount of time in a day. And this idea of time management and this idea that, when we're doing this, we're doing this. That's where those boundaries have to get explored. And your job as the parent is to make it, this sounds crazy, but you have to actually make it worth it for their kid. Like, you have to provide something of higher value. That's the honest answer
and follow through with it.
Right. Like, if we're not doing screens right now, then we're going to plan a fun family event. We'll go have a picnic. Like, that is actually your job.
It's truly that you hit it on the head there.
If you don't have that plan, then you need to get that right, because that's sad to say is actually it is not the job of your child to come up with something better.
Oh,
you might, and they might, but it is really.
But it's true, and it's an epidemic, really, especially with screens and all the distractions now. There's so many babysitters out there that parents just, because they want to buy more time for themselves, so they keep their kid distracted. But your job is to connect and build memories and moments with that kid.
You have to provide value. And I think like that there's parents that get a little feisty on this one, but
I can see that.
Have to, your child is the client. Like that you're providing that. If your child could pick any parent in the world, now this doesn't mean you have to be their best friend and you're not providing discipline and authority. But what it means is your kind of mental framework on this is, if my child had to pick any parent in the world, it's just easy pick. I'm it. I'm there for them. And that is something to honestly aspire to. I think that a lot of parents could go a long way with that. And that's also a harsh conversation sometimes to have.
No.
Because again, what I do can broach into, nutrition is one thing, parenting is another. But if you want this outcome, it kind of has to go through this hallway to get to that room. You sort of have to walk through.
It's through some difficult stuff. There's like some psychology there involved too, that you're dealing with your client.
It's emotion and it's story. And children there's a reason that the sort of classic hero's journey stories, superheroes and all these things are just kind of real easy, like heroes, hero falls, hero like stories, right? And narratives that you build in your life. And you have to often be mindful of that. You have to really design what that life is going to be like. That's the other piece to this too, is that you cannot take it for granted and you can't just willy-nilly. There actually needs to be a game plan for these kind of things. And that's kind of where I come in. And when we go into trade-offs, it could be something even like as concrete and grounded in reality as trading this food for that food. I mean, it can just be simple things like that. Like where, let's say there's 20 foods that the child is eating and 18 of them are like, okay, we probably don't want them eating that. Well, you don't have to swap out all 18 right away. Right? You start to integrate. Maybe you do one swap here or another swap there. Because taking away and restricting never works.
And it won't stick.
No.
Right. Like the screen time. Those little screens. I mean, all the damage of the screens is one thing, but you can say, let's put the little ones away for the day, and then later tonight we can have a family movie.
Right.
Is that a trade-off?
I've done that. Speaking in the affirmative, right? So it's speaking in the affirmative of saying, we'll have movie night later. You can check in your phone. You can do this, right?
Right.
Like, so it's
positive.
Yeah. You're framing it in such a way as like, yeah, phone time will be for later, and we can do this now. And that's that kind of yes and. Right? There's a no but, which is real easy to get in. No, but we can't do that. Yeah, you could check that. You can go on that, and we can do this right now. Like a lot of it is just having that alternative, and establishing like, this is time for that. This is time for that.
In a positive spin. That makes me think of the preschool class I had in Chicago, where we'd make our class rules. We were guided to not say, we're not doing this, no this, no this. It's we will be kind to one another. We will use our gentle hands. Like you make the positive spin at all, and it just kind of lifts you up. It's not like, oh God, I can't do so many things, but look at all the things I can do. You know, it was
Correct.
a different way of making rules, I guess.
Correct.
That
Correct. Yeah.
spin.
It's and picking up on those desired behaviors, if you will, things that you're really kind of proud of, and nudging those along and really encouraging that. Really encouraging that. And then the other thing is like, how do you solve problems, right? Like, how as a parent, they're watching, like, how do you solve problems? If you throw your hands up right away and you get frustrated and upset, then that child's going to have that kind of like, oh, well, there's a learned helplessness. Like, just throw your hands up in the air, call the police on everybody at the first, like you have no ability to like handle tough problems.
Oh my gosh.
But like every
Yeah.
virtue, it can go too far where you're on the extreme end of that spectrum is, I'm so stubborn, I never ask for help. Right. So then it's like showing like your child, like, well, there's no, you don't ask for help. You just, you just kind of, so it's finding that. And that idea of trade-offs also goes into the spectrum of virtue and vice. And these are concepts that kids can actually get, because we can explain qualities like, if somebody's laid back. Oh, do you like when somebody's really calm and laid back? Like, what if they were always that way? You could say it like that. Like you said, what if they're always like that? They wouldn't always want to be like that, right? It's okay to try really, really hard, but if you always try really, really hard and you can't enjoy yourself, right? Because within all virtue can be pushed hard enough where it goes into vice. And all vice has some virtuous aspect into it that it's just a matter of degree. And we can find those qualities in ourselves and our child where we pick up on what's the nugget in that. And when you're showing your child that's how you see the world, you start teaching your child to look at the world through the filter of find the helpers, right? That idea, right? Let's go find the helpers. Let's find the good. Let's see what's interesting about that.
Yeah.
That curiosity. And now what you're doing is you're actually setting a template for them how to think and not what to think, how they could look at the world, because you're demonstrating for yourself, like, look, moms, I'm vulnerable. I'm curious. I'm aware of my own shortcomings. Sometimes just admitting something, it goes a long way. When you can admit something and be vulnerable, now you've opened up the permission for your child to open up and be vulnerable. And now you don't have the hiding the food and the I'm scared to say this because the example has been set that we could be vulnerable.
And there's the connection.
Virtuous quality.
Yeah. And it's communication. I have the example I kept thinking of in ways what I've done. And when like under stress, I snap. And I wind up micromanaging or I start barking at my kids. And it has nothing to do with them. I'm just in a stressed moment. But when I'm now learning to catch myself and I tell them this is not about you. I'm stressed in this moment because I had poor time management and now I'm running out of time and da 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 da. My older daughter is really, because I see her bark. And when she gets stressed, she starts barking at her brother. And I'm like, yikes, she picked that up from me. So we're calling it out and recognizing it. And with my little man, it's literally humbling myself and telling him in my moments of distress, like, this is not about you. This is what I'm going through. I'm just triggered right now. What's something better how else should I do it? Let's shake it out. That feels better. Oh, let's go ground. What's another way? Get them empowered to help you figure out how to.
You said something amazing right there. You just said something amazing that I picked up on when you said you were dealing with your little one and saying, how else could I do this?
Yeah, I gave him the power to contribute.
That is just always a great thing to consider. You don't have to always do this, but it's a really great thing to do at the right time, especially. It can go a long, long way. Is what what could I do to communicate that? What could I do to communicate that better to you? Or how am I not understanding you? So
Mm.
you're asking them a personal question, or what do you think I should do? And it could be something that doesn't involve them.
Mhm.
What do you think I should do about this? I'm thinking about something, right? So what you're actually doing is you're trying to actually set up a scenario that they can mirror later because you
Aw.
want them to talk about
Yeah.
their problems. So what you do is just kind of like, I'm having a situation at work and somebody came up to me and said this, and like, I want to do this, but I'm thinking about this. What do you think? And just
Mm.
kind of like you'd be so surprised at that. And then the fact that they were actually asked their opinion. Again,
Mm.
I'm always going to this because that really is what empowering is about. Is like you've actually shown them some trust. You're showing them respect.
Mhm.
And human beings are reciprocal by nature. We learn that in sales even. It's like, this idea of like you're giving away something for free. Here's a free this, a free sample, right? I mean, it works because, well, one, it's like, oh, thank you for that. But there's this innate desire to be reciprocal. It's within us. And
Mhm.
you open up that reciprocal nature by
Mhm.
finding these opportunities that you could give your child the floor or give them a voice. And that approach, it's sort of coming in through a different angle. That leads to all of this other stuff. All of this
Mm.
other stuff, like now
It
they're
does.
eating better, or they want to join me at the gym because they now feel comfortable and safe, and they feel like they're heard, and they're not just watching mom and dad doing those things, because a lot of times it can backfire where the child associates all that stuff with just it's a lot of stress,
Mhm.
and they
Mhm.
end up going completely the other way, and they might develop like eating disorders, really unhealthy relationships with food, all of these things
Mhm.
that can you know transpire. So this is just where the gold is. I truly
I
believe
think
it.
it's so important. And parents know how fast the time goes. You had a baby and they're a teen. Like it's faster than you realize. And all those little moments matter. And the connection matters. Yeah, the panic I had with this tween going on teen, and I'm like, is she able to communicate with me? And I'm like, well, am I communicating with her? I had to like really check myself and say, am I giving her a safe space to open up to me, or am I constantly like, or looking down, or it's a gentle.
And Heidi, it's also important to not, and that brings up the idea of guilt,
Oh yeah,
parental
I
guilt, and depending,
yeah.
because often what'll happen is it's painful, and
Mhm.
depending, especially if we're dealing with a situation where the child's like 16, 17, and maybe this has just been a tricky, difficult relationship. It's hard because people's awareness of some of those realities and the narrative that they've built up, they have to destroy that. In order to move forward, they have to get to a place of peace with it. And that is really challenging because it's often easier psychologically for the parent to just, well, sort of go back and stitch together this thing that'll make it all make sense because it's painful.
Mhm.
And that's just the truth of that. And it isn't about right or wrong or this, it's that with your given tool set and your knowledge, you did what you were always there with good intent. When parents say to me, "Oh my God, Lawrence, I just feel like am I a terrible parent?" They say, "Am I a
Oh,
terrible parent?" It's like terrible parents don't ask the question, "Am I a terrible parent?"
ah,
That's not a
that's
question a terrible parent
concern.
ever
Yeah,
asks.
that's
Am I
the
am I just is this just like what am I have I been doing everything wrong? It's like the fact that you're coming to that place of trying to recognize that and sort through that is such an amazing thing.
Mhm. Just
And
recognize.
it's
Yeah.
it's extremely powerful. And what's also really important to know is how children they're forgiving also. And another quality of human beings, right?
Yeah.
We're reciprocal and we're forgiving.
Mhm.
We have that in us, in our nature. And it can be a really powerful thing to have that moment where, you know, I wasn't always there as in the way that I wanted to be for you, and that's powerful, and
It's humbling. Yeah.
that is humbling, but that is a way to get to a closer place than you could even imagine
Oh
with
my
your
gosh.
child.
Yes. I remember a
I'm
tear
getting
that
a little
fell.
choked up myself
I
saying that.
know. Well, I'm picturing my little gal with a tear in her eye because she cried. I think it was in our old house. But I had an epiphany. I had a super aha moment. I think I was finally sweating. Like I was just working through something and I had this realization of like what I put my daughter's nervous system through while I was in survival mode. And so I went to her and I'm like, you really stepped into being a mom when I couldn't be. Like even though it was a recall, I just gave her what I recognized, what I put together. I apologized for not knowing any better. And I thanked her for being there with me and still being there
Beautiful.
with me today. Like I just walked her through that moment I had of my own realization.
Yeah.
And she was just like, trickle, trickle. And I'm like, and in my heart, I'm like, oh my God, she's hearing me. But it shifted something in us
That's
because she didn't
beautiful.
need me to go, I failed you as a mother, all these things. I told her what I learned from that, and I recognized her for being strong in that, and I thanked her for it. And that was kind of all it
Amazing.
needed for us to be like, nice. And she kind of stepped into like, yeah, I did that. I did that. It was
It's a
really a
beautiful
beautiful
thing.
moment.
It's a beautiful thing, and
Yeah. And
that
I had to humble myself. I had to humble myself, and I even kneeled. So I was a little lower than her, and just to be like, I want you to hear me. And we had the most tender of moments, and it broke free of some of that shame and guilt I had. I wound up releasing that, and it was very, very therapeutic. It was very comforting, and the connection can be made and remade and remade. You just got to sign up for it. You just got to be ready to put in the work for it. And I really appreciate you bringing this up. I had no idea it was going to twist this way, and it's really moving, but
Yeah,
it's
we didn't
everything.
have any
No, we
conceived
just
bullet
I flew
points
in this from another
for
tape, and I
tonight.
was like, "Hang in there, I'm coming." I'm just so grateful because I'm having all these aha moments too, and it's like we beat ourselves up so much as a parent, even one that exudes, "I'm a high vibe person," and all that. We have those moments, and you need to recognize them and honor them. And humbling yourself is it's huge, and it
It
doesn't mean that
absolutely is.
you did anything wrong. It means you're learning as you go, and you make sure you don't hurt the people you love around you while you're learning these things, especially our littlest teachers. But that was a bad moon arising. Had I not cleared that moment, this child would have had to step into this mother road when I didn't ask her to, over and over, and then we would have had friction. She was able to release, and I was able to release, and it only took me just humbling myself. I'm just so glad you brought that up.
It's very
I get these
powerful.
recalls when you're talking.
It's very, very powerful what you just said. Everything you said, I'm just like, wow, yeah, that's
Oh,
really what it is. And sometimes there's new lessons, and sometimes we just need reminders. It's not, so much that it's revolutionary, mind-blowing, brand new material, but sometimes it's just a reminder as well that, you know, to check in with what you know is true. And that moment of humility, that kind of get down to their level, in a very real physical sense. Even often sometimes, for the best positions, there's heart to heart, and then there's actually side by side in certain times, in certain times of difficulty where they're going through something. So, heart to heart is great when you're as a parent trying to uh, do what you just did,
mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm.
And then there's times where it's a different situation where it's not that you're having to come clean on anything or humble up, but you're seeing them struggling.
Yes, I know where you're
A good
going. I
energy
love
for
this.
that is to be next to them,
Like
because you're
thriving or doing
you're
something.
facing the
Ah,
world together.
mhm.
So that would be where you're sitting next to them on the couch and you're speaking with it, and you're actually literally that physicality actually is interesting. Um And also when a lot of material can be kind of delivered that way, where, because sometimes if it's face to face, it's confrontational. So it's knowing when that moment is. Usually heart to heart is really good for exactly what you just said, because
Okay.
that's, you're literally connecting on that level. When it's, let's introduce new strategies, or let me figure out what you're struggling with and I'm going to be here with you.
Mm-hmm.
This also goes into the leading by example.
Mm-hmm.
Other things that are physical pieces are mirroring them. And that's a classic psychological strategy, but it does help, right? When a person can pick up on cues that, if you're like this, you're closing off, right? So the more you begin, if you mirror them, like, so if they're doing that and then you do that, and you're there with them, and as you move out of that, you'll see them subconsciously often move out of that.
Aw.
A lot of times it's a bit of a dance. You're actually checking in, and it's almost like you are sort of like there's a little back and forth physically as well.
Mm.
Because all these little cues matter. We know that communication is mostly nonverbal. So your body language, your tone, right? We can go into all the, like, what's the exact script to say, but quite often it's like people will remember how you said it.
Yeah. The inflections and the tone behind it is everything.
There's tone to it. There's many, many layers to this.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Mm-hmm.
in each one of these subcategories, we could do a whole show
Yeah, yeah. I was gonna
on
say there's so much
on
to unpack.
all of each one of those
Yeah.
sort of ways of establishing connection, and thereby leading by example. That, in my opinion, to kind of sum this all up and put a bow on it, is that to me is what leading by example means.
Didn't expect it all to go that way. That's beautiful. And with this, I really want to just quickly say with the side by side, when you said that, I was like, oh my gosh, yeah. When I get the most information or even just stories from my older kid, it's when we're side by side, like
Yeah.
working with our hands or doing clay. It's like we're not paying attention. We're doing something, but we're here. We're talking. That's when all the juicy stuff comes out.
There's an expression called pacing and leading.
Okay.
And I used to sell high-end office chairs at a job many,
Oh
many
yeah.
years ago. And these
That though.
chairs, what we were sort of taught was, if I sat in one of the chairs, they sat down, the customer sat down in the chair. If I sat down in a chair as well, I made it a point to slide my chair next to their chair and show them the features of the chair side by side rather than being across.
Wow. I can see how that would
And
work. Whoa.
so pacing is, I'm where you're at,
Mm-hmm.
because so you pace, I'm going to check in. I'm meeting you right where you're at. And now I have the ability to lead. Right? So this is what this whole show has been about, is this idea, connect. That's the pace. We're connecting at a certain frequency, vibe, energy, whatever you call it. Could be physical, it could be tone, it could be reflective listening. It's some checkpoint that says, okay, we're on this same page. I'm where you're at. I might not even agree with you, right? It might be, I could see how you think that way. Going through that at school, that's got to be hard. I don't know if I ever thought that when I was a kid, but I'm thinking about that now. I could see how you could think, like, it might be something you don't agree with the way that they see it.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what this is about. It's about you saying, I could see how you could think that or feel that. Let's think that through. Now you've paced. Okay. Now is the opportunity to lead and guide and nudge and get some information in there. The door has been, slightly wedged open. Sometimes you don't always get lucky. Sometimes it's like, oh, that one didn't work. Some of the doors, you're not going to open every door. You're not going to get it right every time. But this idea of pacing and leading, and it goes into sales, it goes into interpersonal relationships, it goes into romantic relationships, it goes into everything. All human interaction is this kind of thing where, you know, human relationships as a whole are built on foundations of trust and safety at our core of survival. That which is safe, even if it's predictable, is I'm going to sort of trust it. And
Mhm.
sometimes it can even be people are in a groove where it's like, well, I know what's going to happen. I don't even like this pattern, but we're doing it because I know that the outcome, at least so far, hasn't gotten me killed. And
That's
is it until that moment where they, you hit rock bottom or you run into a wall that you want to change? But but I digress. It's so there's just these opportunities to pace and lead, and we're just
Mhm.
looking for all of these different and there's so many ways. I mean, I think I talked about a
Mhm.
bunch of them. There's probably 100 I haven't even touched on yet.
Well, that's a whole nother episode. But all this is tangible. And I tell you what, it's been 4 episodes now, and I keep hashtagging them. This whole series is kids' health, but I really am considering changing it to empowering kids because every episode has been tools to help empower kids. And as a parent, empowering yourself how to teach how to empower your kids. Like there's a lot of empowerment here, and I really appreciate that for me because I think,
I think it's
yeah.
I think it's the go-to. I think that,
Mhm.
in my background with my nonprofit work and now in the current organization working with Rainbow Chefs, it's like both of these organizations that I've been intimately involved with, they focus on these strategies of how to empower a child to make a decision, you
Mhm.
know, and when you feel that way, when you feel empowerment is an important word because you will never see yourself as a victim,
Mhm.
and you will
Big.
you will be a solution oriented person with that framework of empowerment because you've been trusted to come up with solutions. You see that solutions are possible. You see that there is such a thing as being resilient. You see that there's actually people that recognize that. Because I want to, one final important note on this. One of the very worst, devastating, in fact, things to do to a child is punish them when they've done the right thing or when they've tried to do the right thing.
Oh, that hurt. Yeah.
And that seems like obvious, but
Mm.
people often don't realize how they're doing that. When
Mhm.
if a child makes a run at it, or if your spouse, even again, this is human beings, right? And they did their best, or they really put a lot of effort into it, and you dump on that in some way where it's like some kind of like, well, man, if you just did it a little more, it would have been, these little comments. We have to be careful.
Yeah.
Snarky things. It will demoralize a child. It will demoralize an adult.
Mhm.
Honestly, if there's no feeling that me putting an effort in doing something, it just means nothing. If there's that feeling that it goes nowhere, that is a profound, deep, like, pain. That is pain. And the
Yeah.
other probably close partner to that is betrayal, meaning this is why trust is so important, that be very, very, very on guard of, like, your word should be really gold. And yeah, again, if the past is the past, we've talked about that, but moving forward,
Mhm.
remember that because a betrayal cuts very deep as well.
Ooh, that word. Yeah.
If you've been hiding something very important, something's revealed, these kind of things, the longer that goes on, and then at the point of revelation, whether it's a child or the spouse, in this case, the spouse is like finding out someone cheated on you or whatever that might be. The betrayal is powerful because in their mind, then all of that time was some sort of big lie, and it tears them open in ways that you can't even imagine. And so
Mm.
there's all these things to really be on guard of, that they're not to be played with. Do not punish, behavior that is,
Oh, yeah.
should be admired. Like,
Every attempt is a victory because
I mean,
they're
it's there's
trying. Yeah.
nothing wrong with, and that's the whole fine line. There's nothing wrong with trying.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with wanting to be better.
Yeah.
Like, that was an awesome effort, and like you're moving with this. Like, you keep going.
Yeah.
Keep going is always a good thing because it's, because because the other end of that is you find the way you are, and we've talked about that before. Then they're like, well, if I'm fine the way I
Then I'm
am, what's
done.
the point of it? You know, there is that place where we need to encourage effort.
Keep
You got to
going.
be really careful that you don't snuff out. That effort should always be recognized. And then there can always be an element of, what are we working on next? And that can easily be brought up by saying, did you see, like, when you were out there and you were, playing in the game, and that was awesome the way you did that, and like all of that hard work that you're doing on the field is paying off. So instead of saying like, well, you could get even better, all of that is paying off. They'll do the rest.
Yeah.
Right? Because
like,
you've brought it
you're
from
going, you're doing it.
You brought it from the process that they went through to the moment that they're at, and they can finish the rest.
Yeah.
See how different that is than saying, well, just think about how much better you'll be next game. Because then you're not tying that into the idea that they've worked hard to get there. Like, you've been putting in all this great effort. This is awesome. Keep it up.
That's
then
cool.
we're good.
Yeah.
We're good. They get it. We're good. They know now that the hard work pays off, and they don't need to be thought. It's an unspoken, yeah, we're going to keep going with this. It's process driven and not like some kind of like, well, you didn't do it exactly perfect this time, but it's like, oh, really? We all know that. We're like,
you saying it. I was like,
God, like, really? Like, because you just, can't I just,
and ask anybody who's made that journey from being one particular, the health journey. It's not one decision, one and done. There's trials and errors and it's a bumpy road, but it is a road that keeps going. There's no one and done, you're set.
You don't just take one bath and call yourself clean for life. I mean, this is not how it works.
Yeah.
But yeah, I hope this was fun.
That was so fun. And honestly, it was moving. Thank you. Thank you so very much, Lawrence. Yeah, that more empowerment for your children. Again, I think this is going to probably be a series with the longest title ever. How to empower your child to the ultimate kids' health.
Kids' health.
But you have all of these tools could be used for all your relationships in your life. This is, human
we're all
experience.
Just people trying to be people, and we're peopling.
Yeah.
It's a kind of an Ellen Watts thing. We're peopling, we're healthing, we're fooding. We're just doing the things as human beings, and we're high vibing. And
thank you truly for giving this perspective, because I needed it, and I know anyone who's tuning in at this time will be needing it as well. It's very humbling. Lawrence, people can find you kidsgethealthy.com.
Yes.
Lawrence at kidsgethealthy.com, right?
Yeah. So Lawrence at kidsgethealthy.com. You can reach out via email and check out my site. And anyone that's interested in a consultation, I do, a free first call, do 20 minutes or so, where we see if we're a good fit, because there are times that, I might not be the person for you, or I might find that you might need some other services before you get to me. So that's part of the experience. But if we're a good fit, that's awesome. And, we have single sessions, and I do packages as well. And any age, really, if you're an adult and you might not have a kid, maybe you're thinking of having a child, and this could be good information before that happens. That's also very valuable this is part of the sort of education, I think, that aspiring parents could find value in. So as you're going into parenthood, you'd be like, all right, I'm coming in with a little bit of a head of steam.
Oh, for sure. And just for being a better human, have the beautiful human experiences. And I think you could take on any client. Don't have to just be the parent and the kid. Thank you so much again, Lawrence. And folks, again, we'll be back every 2 weeks with Lawrence August, talking about kids' health, aka the empowerment of our children. And I'm excited to see what you have in store for us next, because I had my jaw on the ground and I'm ready to do it again. And I moved. I love being moved.
I did my job.
Thank you so much. We'll see you all in 2 weeks.
Thank you. Bye.